The amount of money the government takes in tax is higher than it's been ever. We're still in a position where public services are very visibly struggling in lots of cases. So we've now gone from a position where we were spending a few tens of billions on debt interest to way over 100 billion. You can basically raise more in tax to pay for public services, or you can cut public services. And that's a really difficult choice.
The Institute for Fiscal Studies is probably one of the most influential economic think tanks in the UK. I regularly use their reports in my videos. And it's not just me. When the IFS speaks, politicians and the media listen. Helen Miller is the think tank's new director.
We have a tax system, it raises a lot of money. It is more damaging to people's incentives than it needs to be. It genuinely gives me heart palpitations to think that tax policy is going to be decided on the back of a forecast. I think if you start with a much bigger, like actually we're going to reform the entire way we tax income.
Yeah.
Big bang, all of it.
Thanks for joining us today. You're the first guest that's ever bought us biscuits.
Oh.
Which I think instantly makes you like top three guests.
Well, your producer told me that it's basically like coming round to your friend's house to have a cup of tea. And I thought if I went to my friend's house, I'd bring biscuits. So I felt like we had to have biscuits, right?
Yeah, do you want a biscuit?
No, thank you.
Would you like a biscuit?
Yeah, I want a biscuit.
Yeah.
I bought ones that you can dip. Although now I'm worried about dipping on a podcast. I'm going to dip and...
Start a riot.
Well, no, I was more thinking I'm going to dip and get it all off my dress as opposed to anything else.
Well, I'm not normally a dipper. Ruth, the producer's staring at me at the background, so I know you want a biscuit,
There's always
Ruth.
a time to start being a dipper.
Yeah, come on, pass those around.
See, I'm more of a chocolate digestive or a normal digestive guy.
I almost bought chocolate digestive.
They're the ones. And they're good for dipping.
Not everyone, well, yeah, makes tea a bit
chocolatey, but yeah. But
I think you've
got to do a quick dip on those.
Yep.
You don't realise how ungraceful eating biscuits is until you've got cameras in your face.
That's why I was like, how are you going to do this with finesse?
Yeah.
Oh, you mastered it.
So you went for a really big bite. I went for a little nibble thinking I'm going to try small in case I regret it, but you've gone for like a full...
Yeah, I've got a massive mouth.
Yeah.
I don't know how to bite things small. That's a one bite to me. Just bang that in.
Okay.
I'm not
in
going
comparison to this, talking about tax is going to be easy, right? We've done the biscuit eating, so...
Because you ask good questions.
So I was going to say, do you want me to take this? So you're the new director of the IFS.
I am.
How are you settling into the role?
Oh, good, yeah. I mean, I've been at the IFS a very long time. I went there straight after my degree, so I've been there 18 years now. So on the one hand, I feel like I know IFS inside out. Of course, being the director is different, but yeah, I love the IFS.
You were the deputy director before.
I was deputy director, and I headed up our tax team for quite a long time. So yeah, I've been at IFS for a long time. I know what I'm doing in that sense, but yeah, it is different when I feel the weight of responsibility of this. I feel like I've been handed some beautiful, jewel or something, and I feel the responsibility of keeping that safe for the next generation.
You're like carrying like a Ming bars. And
exactly, I feel like that. I feel like I've got this beautiful thing that's really important that I've got to keep safe.
How has the influence and kind of the scope or the remit of the IFS changed in the 18 years that you've been there?
So I think the kind of underlying kind of what I would call the mission of IFS has actually been remarkably stable since we were set up, over 50 years ago. I mean, what we're basically trying to do is build the evidence base so that politicians and others have good evidence on how economic policies affect things, communicate that widely so that everyone can be part of that debate and hold policymakers to account. So I think that has been remarkably stable. I think what's changed is that what it means to sort of fulfil that mission changed over time because, one of the things that's changed really starkly in my time is the media. Broadly speaking, back in mid-2000s, you could give a TV interview to the top 5 channels and you've basically reached most people. That's nowhere close to true now, right? Lots of young people don't watch any of the mainstream channels, so it's much more important people do podcasts.
You've got to come sit in random kitchens just to try and reach people.
But the point is that people are getting their media and their information in a much broader way. So I think it's just how you reach people, what it means to try to communicate to people is different. And of course, going forward, things like AI will change that too, right? People don't necessarily go to the original sources so much, they'll get their information through AI. So we're thinking really hard about how can we still inform debates when people are just getting their information really differently. So I think, same mission, but I think what it means to pull that off has been different. And of course, the economic environment has changed loads. We had the big financial crisis, we had the years of sort of recovery from that. There was Brexit, there was the pandemic. We now have much higher debt and higher interest rates than we did. We've got an ageing population. So the kind of the broader context in which we're trying to analyse things is very different.
Much more challenging environment, the trajectory seems less certain and a bit bumpier.
Yeah, I think the public finances, so the position of the government is a much tougher position now than it was in the 2000s. I mean, the 2000s, we could have worried about some things, but things were sort of okay. Now you've got this position where you've got really high debt. That's actually really expensive. So we spend a lot of money on debt interest. So we're just spending, well over 100 billion every year just servicing the debt. So that's obviously different. we're in a position where, despite the fact that taxes are, higher in the UK than they've ever been, at least overall, not for every individual, but overall, the amount of money the government takes in tax is higher than it's been ever, basically. We're still in a position where public services are very visibly struggling in lots of cases. And that's partly because we're spending lots of money on things like debt, partly because we've had some really big pressures, like really big increase in the disability benefits bill, big increase in special educational needs for children, the spending that goes on that. So in this kind of unusual situation of really high revenues but still tight spending, I think that makes the government's decisions obviously really important, but also really difficult. So yeah, I think there's still a role for us. We're not going to get out of business anytime soon. There's plenty of room for, building the evidence base and trying to help people understand the situation.
And you've spoken about communication there and the IFS's attempt to modernise and be upfront with people. And you've been critical of politicians. You said they need to level with voters about the scale and the challenges and make the case for bold reforms.
Yeah.
So I want to look at those two areas, really, the scale of the problems and the bold reforms. If we could start with the problems, you've hinted to a few there. Something I heard you talking about the other day with the debt. I don't think people realise that the ramifications for the borrowing, they hit quick. You pointed out that this is not some obscure thing like it was in the past of, we need to keep the debt down so our grandkids can live. It's like COVID, 3 years later, here you are. This is the repercussions. Is that what we're seeing?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the kind of public. So I think you're absolutely right. I really believe very, very strongly that there are big debates, there are big choices we have as citizens about how to run the economy and what to do. And I think we all need to understand that well enough to be part of it. And I think with debt. So I think the debate in the UK about debt has got into actually a really unhealthy place. And if you look at what's talked about, it's kind of, has the government got enough headroom? Could they borrow more? And I think that's the wrong question. Yes, they could borrow more. It's the question really is, how much would it cost? And if you want to keep borrowing more and more, people are going to charge you more to do that borrowing. And the real question is, should we borrow more? And there's some things you can completely make a case for. You borrow to do a big infrastructure investment that pays off in the future, and the government's doing more of that kind of investment. But it's harder to make the case for things like borrowing for teachers' wages or, nurses' wages or things that you're basically consuming today. So I think we've got in this position where we have a high debt. We are spending a lot of money on debt interest. And that, as you were saying, has come about really, really quickly because, you had COVID, we had a big increase in debt. Interest rates have gone up. So we've now gone from a position where we were spending a few tens of billions on debt interest to way over 100 billion on debt interest. That's a lot of money. The government is basically raising that money in tax, and then they can't spend it on the things you might want to spend them on, doctors or nurses or teachers or better services. It's just going on servicing the debt interest. And that's what I mean when I say we should think hard about how much we want to borrow, because it's not free. It's not just punting it down the road for your grandchildren. It's maybe partly there. It comes with a real price tag that you have to pay. And I think that's the debate we should be having as a country about what do we want to invest in, how much do we want to invest, and how much tax we want to raise, and how many services do we want to buy, and what services do we want to buy. And I think politicians, going into the last election, this was really, really stark. If you were just an outsider to the UK and you came into the UK, you had both parties basically saying, both the big parties, the Labour and the Conservatives, saying, sort of nothing to see here. We don't need higher taxes, we don't need higher borrowing, the fiscal rules are all fine, it's all going to be fine. And what we said at the IFS really clearly, and it's obviously got picked up because I think people know this, was that they were going to have to do one of increase borrowing, increase taxes or cut spending. Labour came into government, what have they done? They've increased borrowing and increased taxes. But I think because they didn't level with people about that, they didn't have that conversation with people, I think people now rightly feel a bit locked out of that debate and are a bit confused as to, well, why are we doing this now? Why are we talking again about tax rises? Because you told us before the election we didn't need them.
And that was a once event. It was like, this is the only time, this will be it. And now it's like, oh no, we might need to do an even bigger one this next budget.
Yeah.
It feels like just what you say can't be trusted, essentially. You come in on promises, and then even we won't tax workers, but we'll put up the employer's NI, which really is a proxy tax on work, isn't it? Like workers and...
Yeah. There's a lot of debate on that one particular about, did it break the manifesto pledge?
I think it did.
Oh, it absolutely did, for a very simple reason. There's a pledge about no increase in taxes on workers. Well, good luck finding me a tax that affects no workers. And in my mind, that rules everything out, basically. But they wrote the sentence, no increase in national insurance contributions. Full stop. The biggest part of national insurance contributions is the part of the tax that happens to be levied on the employer side. that is national insurance contributions, definitionally. So definitionally, they broke that pledge. Now, whether they think they can get away with it politically is a different matter. But again, I think it speaks to this. I think a better approach would have been to level with people about, here's the scale of the challenge, and there are challenges, and there are more coming down the track. There are like ageing populations are going to make it more difficult for various reasons, basically because old people demand more and more expensive health and social care and pensions. Let's have an honest conversation about the choices we face in that situation, about how much tax to raise, what to spend money on, how can we get growth up, which I think is a big problem underlying everything we've talked about. If we had higher growth, everything I've just said would be easier. I don't think you can avoid those conversations with people, but they sort of know that something's going on. I think we should have an honest conversation about that and then think about what can we do to tackle it, rather than pretend everything's okay.
Are you going to win an election with those kind of sentiments, though, especially in a world where, we've got populism and we have quite sweeping ideas on both the left and the right? Tax the rich, it's the immigrants' fault. You could just say these are very simple ideas. If you come in and go, it's all a bit crap and it's going to be really painful, people will be like, oh no, I don't want to vote for that.
So I think we should give it a try. I think, but the way to pitch it is not, it's all crap. I think you have to start with a serious assessment of the issues and the challenges, and then set out a vision for how you go about fixing it. I agree. If you're a politician, you've identified some problems, and you have no ideas how to fix it, well, then you shouldn't be elected, right? Because that's not a good place to be. I think you need somebody who's willing to say, these are the challenges, and here is my vision for what we can do, or the choices we would make that would make this a good outcome. And you explain what would that look like. So, for example, the government had this, economic growth is our number one mission. I think that's the right number one mission. It's the one I would pick. But where is the vision for how they're really going to drive that through? They have got an industrial strategy. They've done much more investment. I don't think they've painted a picture to the country of really how do you drive forward economic growth and what would that look like and how long is it going to take? And no, you're not going to see it next year. It's going to have to take a little while. Here's what you should look for along the way. I think you could set out a vision of that. While if you're a Labour government doing this and you're looking at reform, you can say, well, reform has a vision in some sense. It's a vision for a smaller state, and people like the IFS can hold them to account and say, okay, what would you cut? Because you can have a smaller state, that's perfectly possible, but you have to be specific about what it is you would cut, what would you stop doing, and then you can have two visions for different worlds and you can think about which one you would like. I think what's really not working very well is this, it's all okay, it'll just be fine, and we'll hope they'll sort it out before anyone notices. Because, is it going well for Keir Starmer at the moment? Doesn't look like it's going wonderfully. So I think I'd be willing to give it a different approach if I were a politician.
They seem to just lurch from fiscal event to fiscal event, like budget to budget, right? And they're probably just like, well, what are we going to do this time? Rather than, oh, this is the plan.
Yeah.
There doesn't feel like that. The growth point, I want to touch on that because we would all like growth, but it seems to have been pretty elusive for a long time. So is it credible to sit there and say, oh, we're just going to grow the economy? Because no one's really done that since 2008 by the look, in a meaningful way.
Yeah. So it's two pieces to that. I think growth really is important. And I think it's really easy to underestimate just how important it is. And getting that growth rate up, just for simple things like we have a fixed amount of debt. With a bigger economy, that debt just matters less. It's a less valuable sort of debt. So it would just help with the debt problem, if nothing else. And living standards would be higher and it'd be good. So what I don't think there's not some magic lever in the Treasury where you press and you get growth. Because if there was, anyone could find that. I think what you have to do is the hard yards across lots of policy areas, and that makes it hard, right? So you have to do lots and lots of things on a consistent basis, and that's including things like education, making sure that more children are getting good educations in the early years. They're getting up through to GCSEs, they're getting better GCSEs, they're getting a better set of training post 16. So we have fewer people who are getting to 16 with no qualifications and no hope to go forward. You look at competition policy to make sure we have the right balance between wanting to give firms incentives to grow and innovate, but not having these massive firms that have big market power. So you've got to get competition policy right, and so on and so on and so on. And in tax, which I spent many years thinking about, I think you have to do we have a tax system, it raises a lot of money. There are lots of ways in which it is more damaging to people's incentives than it needs to be for a given outcome. And again, you could go and fix that. So I don't think a politician said, oh, it's all easy, I'll just do growth. That's not good enough. But I think a government that said, we're going to be laser focused on this, and across all the policy areas, we're going to go and tweak all these policies, maybe radically change some of them, but change these policies to mean that we're going to be better for growth. And you're not going to see that next year because it's going to take time for people and resources to reallocate and for things to get better. But I think, what's the alternative? You don't do those things, and then what do you get? Then you're definitely not going to get any growth particularly. So I think I think we have to have more of a can-do attitude and say, growth's really important. There are some things we could do. Let's get cracking and start them.
Why didn't Labour do this in the first budget then? Because people were ready. I was ready for some big reforms, especially to tax. I was thinking, this is it. They're going to do some radical stuff, maybe get rid of stamp duty. I don't know.
Yeah.
And then it was just like, oh.
Yeah. So I think it's fair to say they did do some things. So I think partly they sort of made a political judgment they can only do a few things in some sense. So they're going to reform planning regulations. They're going to try and make it easier to build stuff. That should be pro-growth. People want more housings, for example. So if you can get more housing, people value that housing. That's kind of definitionally, good for growth. They've done a lot more investment, increased in borrowing for investment spending. Interestingly, without getting too much into the weeds, so they had this big increase in borrowing. The spending review this summer was what told us how they're going to spend that money, so what they're going to invest in. And interestingly, a lot of that money actually went to net zero and defence. Some of it did go to things like housing and transport and innovation science policies. I think they're the areas that you'd really expect to be more pro-growth, like, getting people better connected across the country, investing in new science. But a lot of money went to net zero and defence. And that's not a comment on whether that's right or wrong, but they're not necessarily the most pro-growth areas.
Long-term payoff for like net zero as well, right?
Could pay. Well, net zero is a difficult one, right? Because there are other reasons you can do it. But part of what you're doing with net zero is you're saying we already have our homes heated. And under net zero, we need to do exactly the same service, heating our homes, but we've got to spend more money to do it in a more expensive way for other outcomes, like greener outcomes. That's fine. But that could be bad for growth in some sense because you're getting the same service, a warm house, at a higher cost. So again, it's not to say that it's the wrong choice. It's just that, if you're thinking about driving up the growth rate, that's not going to get you as much bang for your buck as if you said, actually, we're going to connect people in the north of England so they can travel across the north and get better,
Put internet on the trains. Just make it so I can log onto the internet when I travel to work.
Exactly. It's all those kinds of things, right? So the government did do a big increase in investment, although that wasn't entirely growth focused. Some of it had other aims in mind. I think they have got a bunch of things they're trying to do in the education space, although we're still waiting for some of those plans and we're over a year into the government. So I would have liked to see the government move a bit more quickly on some of those things. But I think what we're not seeing is kind of the laser focus across all areas of government. I think tax is the one that really stands out as where, they've just taken tax from off the table, partly because they tied their hands before the election saying, we're not going to raise this shopping list of taxes. And once you've done that, it's really hard to reform anything because usually reforms mean you put some things up, you put some things down, you redesign the system. But they also have just decided their approach is more, we'll just try and get more money in the kind of without doing anything big. But what it means is that all you do is create losers. We had a budget last year, and who was unhappy? Well, the employers, because we had higher employer national insurance, the farmers, because they had higher inheritance tax, and you're just making people unhappy with the system. So I think they thought that was a less risky thing to do, to just sort of do the bare minimum in some sense. I think it would have been less risky actually to have a bolder, principled set of reforms that said, yes, we're raising taxes, and we're doing it for this reason. But at the same time, we're doing this list of things that's going to give us a more sensible system. And that system's going to be better for investment incentives and work incentives. And that's going to help be part of the growth mission. I think at least then you would have some good news to go alongside the tax increases. I think they've taken that off the table.
Last time we recorded, Tremaine, you were having some real dramas with your accountant. So how's that been going, mate?
They're sacked. So drama sorted. They're a big corporate firm. They didn't really reply to my emails very quickly, like took a week or two at times. And they charged me way too much. I mean, I've got pretty simple taxes and they were charging me thousands. They saved me some money, but I had to move on.
Slow and expensive.
Pretty much, yeah.
This is one of the reasons that we're really happy to be partnering with TaxZap.
It's a tech platform that makes self-assessment simple. Whether you're self-employed like me, a freelancer, or a director like Damo, big dog.
Instead of sending endless emails, bills and spreadsheets to your accountant, you just connect your bank, answer a few questions that are only relevant to you, and your tax return can be ready in as little as 15 minutes.
TaxZap is really easy to use, and it's HMRC recognized software, so it's safe, secure, and legit.
The price is also decent. So if you're self-employed with one income stream, it's just £89 as a one-off fee. No big accountancy fees. And we also have a discount code, of course.
If you need to file a self-assessment this year, give TaxZap a try. We've left a link in the description and use the code MONEY10 for 10% off your first tax filing. Do you think tax increase is the way to go? Because I was watching your podcast with the IFS podcast with Paul Johnson, and you gave an analogy about the debt being like eating cake and pushing your exercise onto later.
Yeah.
And so more debt is probably not the answer. Do you think that taxing is the answer for growth?
I think there's a choice, honestly. So look, you're not going to put up taxes and have that be pro-growth, right? Putting up taxes, and I'm going to simplify, but putting up taxes basically means you're taking money from somebody. And when you take money from somebody, you almost always reduce their incentives to do something, to work more or to save more or something like that. So I don't think we should fall into thinking you can sort of raise money and pro-growth. I think what you could do is say, if you're going to raise money, there are better and worse ways of doing that. And you could do it in a way that was less damaging to growth incentives. Also worth remembering that, we're talking about the Chancellor maybe wanting 10, 20, 30 billion of extra tax revenues, maybe. They're currently raising 1,100 billion. So whatever they do at the margin, whatever little thing you do, how you get that current 1,100 billion really matters. And if you can get that money in a way that's doing less to work incentives and less to savings incentives, then I think you can get a growth boost there. But the bigger picture question of should they raise taxes, I think that's a choice, which is why I think it should be in the public debate. I mean, basically, here's the choice we have. I don't think just borrowing more money for day-to-day spending is the way to go. And actually, given that Rachel Reeves has put such a lot of weight on her fiscal rules being ironclad, breaking those I think would be really problematic for the government in terms of how much it costs to borrow more money. But you can basically raise more in tax to pay for public services, or you can cut public services. And that's a really difficult choice, right? And of course it depends on, people have different views depending on which taxes you're going to raise and what public services you're going to cut. But that genuinely is a choice. There's nothing inevitable about having to have higher taxes. Now, this particular government set out its spending plans in the summer for the next few years. It would be odd for them to come back at the budget and say, we set out all those plans, now we've changed our mind, we're going to cut those plans by some number of billions. That would be odd. But they also could have foreseen this was going to happen, that they'd be in this situation again. And it's within the realms of possible, in the sense that as a citizen, you should be thinking there is a choice the government is making about how much to raise and how much to spend. There's no inevitable law of nature that means we have to have higher taxes.
I'd like to preempt some of the comments. And one thing that I think people will say is, haven't we been through a massive period of cutting public services in the form of austerity? And how is that possible then that we come out the other side of that and the size of the government is the biggest it's ever been?
Yep.
Why are we spending 45% of the economy on government?
Yep. I think it's a cracking question. So I think there's a few things going on. So we did go through years of austerity, and some bits of government got cut quite a lot, including local government. I'll maybe come back to those in a minute. But some bits of government were still growing. The NHS is by far the biggest bit of government. I mean, it's huge compared to the other departments. And that has been keeping growing. Another piece of historical context to bear in mind is that for many decades, what was basically happening at a high level in the UK is that you had defence spending that was falling, and you had health spending that was rising. So basically, there was a peace dividend. Money was being moved from defence into health. I mean, not necessarily that explicitly, but that was kind of freeing up resources. So you had a situation where you could spend more on health without having to raise the overall level of taxation. Those days are gone, right? Partly because defence spending had got quite low and it couldn't be cut any further, so there was no more dividend to come. But also now this government has chosen, and I expect other governments might make a similar choice, to start increasing defence spending. So now we're in a sort of an unusual position of trying to increase defence spending and health spending at the same time, and that puts pressure on government. I also said there's also just been underlying pressures on what the government is trying to do. So I think the starkest example of this is the disability bill. So we give some benefits for people, there are different types of benefits, people with various types of disabilities. And both the number of people claiming those benefits and the cost of those benefits has gone up hugely.
Is it 10% of working adults that were available to work are on disability benefit?
Yeah.
So what you take one room, get 10 people in a room, one of them will be on, which
is big,
seems
right?
mental in a way. I don't know. I don't want to speak to people.
That's a lot of people. And importantly, that it's been a big increase. So I haven't got the exact numbers in front of me, but it's been something like, it used to be sort of like 30 billion. We're now at something like 60 billion. It's going to go up by even more. So part of the answer to hang on, haven't we had all this austerity and these cuts? There have been big cuts to bits of government, but there are some bits of government, health, defence, disability, that are actually going up quite a lot. And on the local government one, I think this, like, the word local government always sounds really dull, but it's actually really fascinating. So think about your councils and what happens in your local area. People immediately think, I think, of like bin collection and libraries, and they do that. But actually, a lot of what local government does is social care for adults and children. And what you've seen is a big increase in the cost of social care. So actually what's happening is that there's been an overall squeeze in the budget. But even within a budget, they're having to put so much more money into social care for adults and children that everything else is getting really, really squeezed. And most people in that area won't see that spending because most people at a given point in time aren't receiving social care for adults or children. But those who are, that bill is growing. So again, it's an example where there has been a squeeze overall, but some demands on the state are going up really quite a lot.
Is that why Birmingham can't get their bins collected? Because the money's going to the social care side of things?
Broadly, I mean, every council's got their own specific set of circumstances going on. I think Birmingham has some other things about what they invested in. But yeah, the big picture story is that local government has had a budget squeeze, but the demands placed on local government have been increasing. A similar issue is going on with education. There's been a huge increase in the number of children with special educational needs and disabilities. Huge.
Where are these increases coming for social care and children with these needs?
Yeah, how do people suddenly become more
needing of
disabled?
social care or more?
Especially when the NHS is getting more money than ever, you'd think it would be.
Yeah.
And like
looking after
more
people.
information, medicine's getting better and,
Yeah, I think there are a few things going on. I don't think we have a full decomposition. I think partly it looks like there's some evidence that people are getting more unwell in terms of disability. So there's been a big increase. So part of the disabilities come through mental health. And there's some evidence that mental health has worsened. So it's, there might also be some issues, I'm thinking about children's special needs, of greater recognition or diagnosis.
Autism and ADHD.
Yeah, autism, ADHD, speech and language problems more generally. So partly it could be a recognition of problems that were there anyway, but have been recognised. And part of it could be a genuine increase in need. And I'm not sure we have perfectly bottomed out exactly the splits. But they're good examples where there are just growing pressures on what the government has to do. There are also other things, again, getting a bit into the weeds, about like the productivity of the government. So you put in some things into government, like, inputs like money and wages, and how much do you get out the other side. A lot of services like the NHS and the justice system are just less productive than they used to be. So for a given amount of input, resources, money, you're getting less out. And again, it's going to vary why that's happening across different services, and it's not fully understood. But that also matters because you're not getting as much return as you used to. But again, I think the important point for people to take away from this is that these are the kind of choices we have to make, right? Do we want to put more money into the NHS or social care or special educational needs? Who should be supported for their disability? How should we support them? The government had a plan. They had to U-turn on the plan. But we could debate exactly what the system should look like. But I think when you've got a system that's going up so fast, I think it has to be right to ask, is that system doing what you want it to do? All the people with mental health problems, are they being well supported by this system? Would another kind of support be better? Who should be getting support? I think those are debates we should be having. Maybe we'll decide that, yes, system's working as it should, everything's fine. But I think we should be having those debates about what the government should do.
Yeah, because the one thing that when you look at the data about the long-term disability or sickness benefits, people just don't come off them. It's like a trap. They get into that system and they get stuck, and that's a real shame, isn't it? If someone in their 20s is all that labour and output that they had, that potential just gets kind of wasted. We should be looking to try and stop that, right?
Yeah.
Rather than
I think what's really hard about the
in.
disability debate is that people are in lots of different kinds of situations.
Yeah.
So there'll be some people who might have, a very acute physical disability that's not going to go away. It's a lifelong condition that means they have higher costs of living, and you might think that actually you want to permanently support that person in that cost. And then you've got other people with all sorts of different conditions, but other people might have a person in their, late teens, early adulthood with an anxiety disorder, for example. And you want to think, I think you're right, for that person, it can't be just right to say, well, you've got a permanent condition, we'll just give you some money in some sense. You might want to give them some money, but
the rest of your life.
But you surely have to also think about how can we support that person more holistically,
them and get them back into work,
to try to think about how can they manage or overcome some of those things. But I think what makes it hard is that in these debates, everyone will have in their mind the sort of the stereotype of the person on these benefits. And the reality is you're trying to design a system for lots of different kinds of people. And you have to have a system that's going to work for different combinations of things.
So why did Labour struggle to get through their welfare reform bill? And do you think they're going to go at that again? Because this seems like an obvious part, because it just doesn't seem sustainable to me that 10% of people that could work aren't.
So I think the problem they basically had was they were trying to save £5 billion, which in some sense is a lot of money, and it could have been a big change for some individuals. Actually, the disability bill would have still been going up over time. It's just that it would have been going up less quickly than it otherwise would have done. And I think they didn't get it through their backbenchers because it was seen as being done as a cut for cut's sake and not as a more principled
Anti-Labour
look.
a bit.
Not as a principled look of like who should you support and how you should support them. It was just just cut back generosity. And that's why it didn't get through, I think. I mean, they have a review now being led by Stephen Timms that's meant to be looking at the system, although he said that his aim is not to cut the generosity, it's to think about is the system well designed to help people? But like I said, I think when you've got a bill that's going up so quickly, even if you want to decide ultimately that it's fine, I think it has to be right to look at that and say, this system is clearly going to more people than it was ever designed to go to originally. Who is it going to? What are they getting? And how do you support people? Like some people have disabilities and they're in work, some people are out of work. We have different ways of supporting those kinds of costs. What's the right balance between those things? How can you help people who are disabled to get into the job market? Or to stay attached to the job market, or to have adaptations that help them go. I think it's all these things you need to think about, and it's not just there's not just one lever like more money, less money. There's all sorts of things that go around, and there are other important things that people in this space would talk about like dignity, or like what the system asks of you, or what you're required to go through to get these benefits. I think people's experience of interacting with that system also really matters. So I think a kind of a broader look at the system and how it's working is right. But I also think when you've got a bill that's going up so much, we should as a society be asking, what do we want to spend on those kinds of things?
What about our OECD peers? Are they seeing similar pressures within their welfare systems like that, or is it just us?
So other people, I haven't got all the figures, but other countries are seeing some increases in health-related issues. Their systems are kind of different. They're not all. I think we stand out as seeing a particularly high increase in some of the bills. But our broader welfare system is different too. So it's a bit like you're not comparing like for like in some sense. So we're not entirely alike. So some of the underlying increases in health problems look like they're real in some sense, and other places are getting them. But other systems look different in how they support people.
Yeah, my own personal experience is that all of these systems, all of the parts of government spending feed into each other, and we often forget that. So I won't harp on about it, but I had an incident where some stranger just punched me in the side of the head on a night out. I didn't know him. It was like an unprovoked attack. And, I was fine, like mentally, but I could see how someone might come out of that and be so anxious that they would never want to leave the house again. And that's because, and that person, it took 12 months to go to court. They were found guilty of like GBH with intent or whatever, but the prisons were too full, so they didn't go to prison. They were ordered to pay me £15,000. They paid 300 quid, and then they've never done anything since. So, there was no punishment. I went to hospital. It took 17 hours to get the brain scan because they were like, sorry, there's another 30 people here who need emergency brain scans. And the doctor said, if you want to get served quicker, just pass out and then you'll go to the front of the queue. So I was like, all right, great advice. You need an emergency brain scan, but it's going to take a day. But anyway, you could see how the different components, I'd never really considered that the court and prison system could lead to people, falling out of work. But for someone like me, who is highly productive and pays a lot of tax, at that moment, I might have slipped out of the system and become a nervous wreck and being like, I can't leave the house anymore. And it feels like we go, we'll just cut the prison and court budget and that won't impact the amount of people that work, but It does. It all ripples. Yep. It's like one big system, isn't it?
It is a big system, yeah. And there's lots of overlaps between, the ones you've mentioned, also the overlap between social care and healthcare and interactions between, think about children, what happens at home, what happens at school. So there's the formal education system, there's also all the support networks that go to parents around that. And these things are they're all interacting in important ways. But I think it's also important, it's a good example, that it's not just about money. I mean, money obviously makes things easier. And if there was more growth in the economy, we had a bigger economy, it would be easier to spend money on things. But take the court system. We've actually been doing lots of work on that recently back at the IFS. And that's an example where it looks like productivity took a big hit during COVID. Yeah. And some of that might be understandable, like courts were closing or whatever. But actually, if you think about now, how do we get rid of the backlog? Because there is a big backlog in the court system, and that causes the kind of problems that you experienced, right? And people it makes people really notice that, right? Most of us aren't interacting with the court system most of the time, but when you do, it's because something's happened in your life that's unpleasant and that needs a resolution, and you want
justice,
and you want to get through that as quickly as possible. So the backlog, I think, really matters for how people experience what the state is doing. But actually, if you just threw more money at the problem, it's not obviously going to solve the problem. I mean, it might help, but you need courtrooms and you need judges who are already trained to take. So you can't just immediately get tons more judges, right? So you have to think about, in that backlog, how do you prioritise who gets to go into the court system, or how do you think about the resources that are needed for those things? So I think it's a good example, which a bit earlier, is that you need really good policies that need lots of detail. You need to do the hard yards and think about, in an area, you need specialists to think about how do you manage the court's backlog? How do you manage, not just how much money do you pour into the NHS, but how do you manage the interaction between GPs and other local services, and how much money do you put into capital equipment and IT versus nurses, and how much middle management do you need, because it matters who's doing the rotary and all these things. I think whatever money you're going to spend, you've got to have really good policies that mean that actually the state is working really well, and that's much harder, right? I think what politicians need to do is find a way to say, but growth would make all those things easier, and here are the things we need to do to get growth, and if we had growth, these things would be easier. I think putting those things together for people, which is difficult, right? Because it's growth is this really big abstract concept. But I think if we started there, people might be more willing to talk about, why should we all expect? I mean, I think it'd be great if we expected and demanded of our government a really big budget that had a lot of tax reform in it, and that actually made some losers. Because tax reform basically means you want to take something from somewhere and move it somewhere else, even for a given level of revenue. So you should expect there to be some losers, because currently the system is unfair in ways that people are kind of unfair winners of some system. I think we should be demanding our politicians, I want a better tax system. I don't want a tax system that's doing this much damage. I expect my government to tell me how you're going to fix it. And instead, people are because politicians do these things, they pick them in isolation. They had the inheritance tax on farmers. A lot of people felt sympathy for the farmers because they felt, they've been targeted, they've been picked on. Actually, I think it's a really good case that the reform was moving in the right direction and moved towards a better tax design. But it wasn't framed as a tax design problem. It was like a make the system. It sounded like we need some money. We've picked this group and it's the farmers. And of course, then everyone feels sympathy for them because they feel, why have you picked on them? They're making our food, and etc. So I think if we had a broader debate, people might be more likely to demand of their politicians bolder action and accept that it's going to be some cost along the way. And I think if you start with a bigger picture, again, I'm not a politician, I'm not trying to be elected, but I think if you start with a bigger vision about what we're trying to do and have these kinds of conversations, people would then not only expect, but desire a government that said, I'm going to do bold things. You should expect me to be doing bold things because that's what it's going to take to move the dial.
So why don't they?
Yeah, I was about to say, because the IFS, you guys, from your podcast and everything you say, it's all very on the nose. It's very logical. It makes sense. I don't think many people disagree with it. But are the politicians just too worried about being re-elected? Why don't they want to make bold changes and reforms?
Yeah, I don't know, honestly. I think
That's sad, isn't it?
I think it's a few things. Well, I think it's a few things going on. I think it's, this stuff is hard, right? And I think when you're talking about these kinds of policies, whether it's child for children or for tax or whatever, details actually kind of matter quite a lot. And therefore, it's hard to do the kind of poster version of it that says, here's this thing you put on a bumper sticker around the election. I think you need details. And of course, there's always somebody out there in the spectrum that's making it a case. There's an easier solution out there. There's a kind of, here's a problem, you just need a wealth tax, or you just need this. So in some sense, you're competing with much, much simpler narratives. And I'm saying there's a more nuanced, more complicated narrative. And I think that just makes it harder to find a way to convey. I mean, we've been talking about this for, a while now, right? It's not the 90-second soundbite that you put on a TV screen. I also think we're in a bit of a bad equilibrium where we're I think there are a bunch of things that are just put in the too hard bucket. And I think they're put in the too hard bucket because politicians think of them one at a time. So if I pick any tax reform, and you pick it inheritance tax on farmers, if you pick that and you say, well, that looks really difficult if you do it on its own. And we saw they did it on its own and it was really difficult. But it's because you're looking at it in isolation. I think actually the mistake they make is they look at things in isolation and on their own they look kind of difficult. I think if you start with a much bigger, actually we're going to reform the entire way we tax income.
Yeah.
Big bang, all of it. Then I think actually in my mind, it's harder technically. There's more things you have to do. There are more policies to design. There's more legislation you've got to change. There'll be more losers along the way. So in some senses, it's bigger and you're going to upset more people. But I think that broader view allows you to make a principled case as to why you're doing something that could be better for the country. Whereas if you're just doing IHT on farmers, it's really hard to make a principled case. It looks very targeted. So, but I think partly I think it's that the debate has lots of simple narratives out there and you're competing with simple narratives. I think therefore politicians sort of feel they have to compete on those terms. And partly is these policy debates are hard and technical and you have to find a way to communicate that.
I was going to say, is there a communication problem?
I think I'm more optimistic about people actually than a lot of politicians seem to be. I mean, they're busy, right? And I get it. People are trying to get their kids off to school. They're trying to get their laundry done. They haven't got time to be sitting and being a tax expert. So I get that people are trying to run their lives and lives are hectic. So I don't think people should be expected to be tax experts. But I do think people want to be part of these big debates we're having, at least to know that these debates are happening in a sensible way and to not fall into this, well, it's either this or that. I think they get these simple narratives aren't quite right. So if I were a politician,
want to listen. They listen to Dan Needle and people like that that gain popularity. They don't want to be a tax expert, but they want to hear from them.
Yep.
And they want to hear from people that have that are highly credible, that clearly know their stuff, but can communicate it in a way they understand.
I think it's one good thing. In some sense, people talk about fewer people get their news now from just, turning on the TV and watching a mainstream channel. More people listen to podcasts, they listen to longer form interviews. I think that's good. I think people are more engaging. Not everybody, and obviously TikTok's not that. There are some things that are just, you get your 20 seconds or whatever. But I think in general, people do want to have more engagement with topics. So I'm more optimistic that you could have conversations with people. But look, it is hard. And, I think Labour's, particularly with the current government, Labour went into the last election feeling like they just had to win the election and therefore they were sort of trying to do it at any cost. And I think they thought, and I'm not a politician, but I think from the outside it looks to me like they thought the kind of least risky way to do that was just to say, we won't do anything, there's no tax measures here, no borrowing, and look, we'll even say, here's a list of things we won't do on tax. And they got through the election. What they hadn't really worked out is, well, if you win the election, what are you going to do? Because you might get to a budget, you might need a big tax increase. What are you going to do at that point? And it's almost like they hadn't thought, they're like, well, when we get there, we'll worry about that. But of course, they did get there, and they're going to get there again in the autumn, I expect. And I think it's coming home to those decisions before the budget to just win, before the election, to just get through the election. I think kind of coming home to roost now because they've taken so many things off the table. They're going to have a really tough job raising big sums of revenue. Not because raising big sums of revenue is hard in some sense. You could put up income tax or national insurance or VAT, and you could relatively straightforwardly, whatever you think of those measures, get money in the door. It's hard because when you've ruled out such a long list of things and you're scrabbling around with little taxes and you're saying, well, we're not going to do reform, we're not going to do this, we're not going to do that, then you're left with a really difficult bunch of decisions. So I think it was a mistake going into the last election, personally, ruling out so much. We said this at the time as well. This is not a retrospective. We went in the minute they had their manifesto and they said, we're not going to do these things. I'm on record saying that's a mistake. You don't know what the world's going to look like in 2 years. You don't know what policy you might want to do. You might want to do reform. Why tie your hands? It's like being a tradesperson and saying, I'm going to leave half my tools at home. I don't know what job I'm doing today. I might need to fix a sink, but I'm leaving my wrench at home because I'm just going to leave it at home. It's like, why would you do that? You wouldn't do that, right? So why is the Chancellor taking a whole bunch of really important tools and shoving them in the drawer and saying, no, not going to touch those? That just seems to me to be a bizarre way of running things, honestly.
Okay, T, talk to me about your attitudes towards risk.
I mean, I like a bit of risk in my investments, but I definitely would say since the podcast, I've toned it down a little bit, not quite as gung-ho and carefree as I was in risk. So yeah.
Yeah, shooting from the hip all the time, weren't you? Yeah. I think personally that you should take risks, but it should always be in areas where you have a unique skill set, an edge, expertise, like your job, things like this.
Definitely.
One area that I wouldn't take any risks is compliance.
Yeah, the risk changes as you grow in business and you need to be on top of it, which is why we partner with Vanta.
Vanta automates a lot of risk processes and helps you see your risks in a centralized platform so you know what really needs your attention.
Besides risk, the main thing Vanta does is automate compliance with security protocols you need to scale, like GDPR, HIPAA, ISO 27001, and SOC 2.
The beauty of Vanta is they make it easy to prove you're compliant with these standards, saving you up to 90% of the time it takes. And on average, $500,000.
If you know what these acronyms like SOC 2 are, you probably need Vanta. You can book in a demo at vanta.com/making money. There's a link in the description.
The next budget Do you think we're going to get more tax?
Probably, yes. I mean, again, not because we had to. It is a real choice. But I think, what's happening, the government will get an assessment from the Office of Budget Responsibility about whether or not they're meeting their fiscal rules, which is basically, are they getting enough money in from tax revenues to pay for day-to-day spending? And I think what's going to happen is that unless they do any policy change, the answer will be no, you're not meeting that rule. And that's for a few reasons. One is they've U-turned on some things. They were going to save some money. They've said they're not going to save some money from disability benefits, for example. And the OBR, like the official watchdog, actually has a very optimistic assessment of growth relative to other forecasters. And therefore, if they just move back in line with other forecasts, they just downgrade their growth expectations, that basically means you've got a gap now between how much you're raising, how much you're spending, that under Rachel Reeves' fiscal rules she'd need to fill. Now, she could cut spending, given that they just settle spending in summer. I think that's unlikely. At least unlikely to do all of it. So yes, basically, I don't think it's inevitable, but I suspect we will see tax rise. What we don't know at this point, what Rachel Reeves doesn't know, is how much work she'd have to do. I mean, she hasn't got the assessment yet from the OBR. They haven't made a final decision. She actually won't know yet. I mean, she'll have a sense, but she won't know yet exactly kind of the pounds billion number between of work she has to do.
Is that why she's delayed the budget so much, do you think?
So
like the last possible
in some
moment.
sense, it's like you delay the budget and then you kind of work back. And you always have a narrow window. So I think they probably delayed it to give themselves a bit more time to think about things and think about what to do. But I mean, one thing worth saying that I keep saying recently is that it genuinely gives me heart palpitations to think that tax policy is going to be decided in like a couple of weeks on the back of a forecast. Like, how is that a way to design tax policy? People like me spend decades thinking about tax policy. We think a lot about the details and the effects of policies. And, obviously politicians have to make decisions. It's a political choice ultimately. But the idea that you're fine-tuning the tax system in this very micro way on the back of some forecast and you're going to make some decision in a 3-week period just sort of horrifies me. I just think we should be thinking long-term about what kind of system we want, how to design the taxes. We should be having a vision we work with, not what can we get away with? Is this polling well? Is that polling well? Can I scrape a few billion from here? Could I do this? That just feels like a really horrid way of trying to make tax policy.
Especially when the forecast, when you look at them, it's always like, oh, we're not going to spend anything here, but then we're going to do it, or we'll make the savings in 5 years. And they never come true, do they?
Yeah.
They always get there and go, oh, we were wrong on the forecasts.
Yeah. In fact, the OBR has got... they did this great, and this is definitely one for the nerds, they did this great report called the Fiscal Sustainability Report. And it's like a big, long, deep dive into all the risks around the public finances. And one of the things they did in their most recent one, had a chart. And what it basically showed is governments, and this is not just this government, it's previous governments too, say they're going to get debt down in 5 years' time. They're like, we're going to borrow more now, but don't worry, in 5 years, we're going to get that debt falling. And what happens is you get to that 5-year period and it's not falling because they're always looking at the next 5 years. They're always saying that in 5 years' time, we'll do this thing.
You've seen the chart and it's like this.
It does that.
I've looked at the chart.
And that's what I meant earlier about are we in a good place, in a position, a good debate about the debt? Well, no, because whatever rules we have, the debt's not coming down. Even though we keep saying it will, it's not. That can't be a good position to be in. To never actually follow through on what you think you're going to do can't be.
I'll eat cake today and exercise tomorrow.
Exactly, it's that. It's exactly that.
Every day.
Exactly that. And but we all know that if you keep eating cake and don't exercise, then you're not going to be in a healthy position in 5 years' time. You're going to be fatter.
It feels like when I was doing my uni degree and I've got a deadline for Friday, and then I spend all of Wednesday, Thursday night in the library doing it, when other people spent 6 months or a month doing it. And it's like, you have all these resources, you have all the knowledge, and you're going to make these big decisions. Why don't you just take your time and do it properly?
Yeah, and that's how I feel about tax. I mean, I've been working on tax for decades. I mean, there's this big review in 2011 that was like, here's how you design the tax system. And there are some choices, but this is not about do you have it more progressive or less progressive, or do you have higher level. It's like the structure, the design of the tax system. So we can all agree on the design, I think, and then you might want higher or lower taxes, you might want more or less progressive taxes. You could tweak rates for that, but you get the structure right. So that vision is sitting there. You can go and get it on the bookshelf right now. I don't think, and we've been talking to Treasury for years and years. I think we actually know quite a lot about that. I mean, take housing as an example. We have a stamp duty. Stamp duty is an awful, awful tax. It should not be a part of a modern tax system. It penalises transactions. You and I might want to swap houses because we want to change where we work. But the transactions tax means that we're not going to do that. That is silly. At the same time, we have a council tax that is regressive. And I'm not saying everything needs to be progressive, but actually it's lower for people in expensive houses than people in low value houses. And it's based on values from 1991. Imagine if I said to you, I'm going to tax you on your income in 1991.
Nice.
And it's
Yes, please.
Yes.
yeah, but then you said, make take a child. Well, I didn't have an income. Well, imagine you did have an income. What would it have been? We're doing that. We're building houses and saying, if that house had been built in 1991, what would it have been valued? When we're doing council tax, but that's absurd. So we know how to fix that. You update values of properties. You value them what they're based on today. You have a proportional tax. It's not regressive. It's just a proportion of your value, and you scrap stamp duty.
It's a pre-made wealth tax as well, because if it reflects the value of the home properly, and you've got a £100 million house in Mayfair, that's a wealth tax that is a bit easier to maybe implement than a general wealth tax, because it's like, well, there's a house there. You try moving that somewhere else, and we know it's there because there's a door.
Yeah, and a great example, there's obviously a bit of the debate. It's all about, do we need a new wealth tax? But actually, the ones we have at the moment, property taxes, inheritance taxes, capital gains taxes, are all broken for different reasons.
Inheritance tax
We
is
know
a
how to
wealth
fix
tax
them.
potentially as well, or could be structured as a genuine wealth
And again,
tax.
that's an example where, people have very different views on inheritance tax. I think it really is kind of a political choice whether you want one or not. It's like people have different philosophies on it. But if you're going to have one, I think you should apply it to all assets, and not only to some assets and not the other assets. Because the minute you do that, you have people putting their money into assets that aren't in the inheritance tax. So again, condition on having one, we can debate the design. We know all those things. What you need is, and actually, to be fair to the government, they have changed some things. So we're bringing pensions into inheritance tax and other things. So they are making some changes. But from my mind, they're just not being bold enough and going fast enough. And they're also doing things in the other direction. So in the last budget, we had an increase in stamp duty. And that not big. They must know, because we've told them a billion times, that it's a silly tax and it's not a good one to increase. Why did they do it? I suspect because they thought politically they can get away with it. Because most people, it's an increase on second homes. Most people aren't paying it most of the time.
And landlords.
And
so
landlords.
you're kind of like, boo, landlords.
So they sort of get away with it. But again, it's not a good way to design a tax system.
Do you think a new tax, a new wealth tax, like 2% on assets above 10 million would be a good idea?
On balance, I don't know. So I think there's a few things about that. One is that I think we shouldn't underestimate just the practicalities of actually implementing it.
Valuing the wealth.
Valuing the wealth.
Yeah.
Like currently we don't even value houses. But actually if you're talking about wealth, especially about top wealth, a lot of it's private businesses. So you've got to value that private business every year. We could do it. We put a person on the moon. We could value wealth. It's not that we can't do it. It's just that it's hard and it's it takes a lot of we don't do it currently. So just getting the machinery up and running to actually do it would be hard. I think that you can make arguments for an annual tax on wealth, but they're really very, very subtle and specific. I think the argument is they're wealthy people, tax them more. I think actually when you look at the details, that's a much harder argument to make. Basically, I think the problem with the wealth tax is that you're taxing somebody who holds onto their wealth. The longer they hold it on, the more you're taxing it. That discourages savings and investments. I don't think we want to be doing that. I think what we want to do is if people are getting big returns from their wealth, so for example, capital gains, I think you do want to tax capital gains properly, and we don't tax them very well at the moment. So I would absolutely look at how you tax the returns to wealth, but I wouldn't have a new tax on top. I also think we have to face the reality that we are an open economy. If you're talking about taxing a small number of people with a higher tax rate, and 2% sounds really low, but actually it's 2% on wealth every year. And if you've got £100 and you're only making a 5% return on that, well, 2% compared to the 5% is a big number, right?
It'll take 50% of the gain over 30.
Exactly. It's a much bigger share of the gain than it is of the stock. So actually 2% sounds low because we're not used to thinking about taxes on stocks, but compared to the flow, it can be a very high tax rate, which is why it has these big discouraging effects. But also, for the small number of people who are in this ultra-rich category, they can move. And yes, there are some things we can do, and yes, we could still tax things that are in the UK. But I think we shouldn't underestimate that if you try and get lots and lots of money from a very, very small group, that group can move somewhere else. So look, it's not where I would go. I wouldn't go with a new tax. I think if you wanted to tax us about inequality and making the case for a one-off tax is actually much easier to do. If you can do a one-off tax, and if people genuinely believe it's one-off, they really think you won't come back and do it again, then economically it's very efficient. You take a big amount of money and no one changes their behaviour. That's kind of a great thing for a tax. So the question on that really is, can you do it in a way that's credible? And people don't think, well, you said you won't do it again, but I think you will do it again. Because if they think you're going to do it again, then it discourages them. And you have to do it in a way, and then it's a fairness question. Is it fair to take some share of people's wealth? And that's a political question. People will disagree about that. But for my mind, I think before we start thinking about fancy new taxes, I would just start with fixing capital gains and dividends and how we tax landlords and how we do inheritance tax. Get those taxes working better.
What's wrong with capital gains tax? You said we don't tax it very well. I feel like I'm taxed very well on my capital gains.
Well, you should get your buzzer ready, because this is one that's definitely in the weeds. I mean, look, I think there's different ways to think about this. One way to think about it is, when you're getting returns to something, think of an investment, there are kind of two types of returns. So one is what I would call like a normal rate of return. So think of it as like you just shove money in the bank or an investment of some sort, an ISA or whatever it is. And all you're really trying to do is save for tomorrow. And I want to say, I don't want to spend it today. I'm going to save tomorrow and buy something tomorrow. And I don't want to stop people doing that. The government shouldn't be saying, well, you should do more or less of that. It's not going to help us with any redistributive motives. So I wouldn't tax that normal rate of return. But if actually you're getting a high rate of return because you got really lucky, or because actually it's really the return to work and you put lots of work into your investments and you got returns in capital gains, or you're a business owner and you did lots of labour and you got your returns through capital gains, then I think those kinds of returns we should be taxing at the same level we tax labour incomes. So if you're willing to tax me, if I'm a banker and I do lots of work, you tax me at high rates, why should you tax me less if I'm doing the same work but through my own company? But what that means is that the capital gains tax is now wrong in two dimensions. The tax base is often not generous enough. As an example, if you just get inflationary gains, you can get taxed on those. Why are we taxing inflationary gains? But at the same time as the base is not generous enough, the rates are often lower, not always, but usually lower than labour income. So some capital gains are taxed at zero. If you die with capital gains, you get taxed at zero. We have business asset disposal relief that's a lower rate of tax than labour income tax. So I think you need this sort of two-part solution. You need to fix the base and make it less distortionary to savings and investment decisions. And with that sorted out, then I would align rates across all forms of income. So whether you're a landlord or an employee or a business owner, you would be paying the same overall marginal rate. And notice I haven't said what the rate is there. We could debate whether it should be higher or lower than current labour income taxes, but I'm just saying I'd level it across. But you can already see from that, that's not something that's easy to put on a bumper sticker or on a political poster. But currently you have people who say we want higher capital gains rates. Well, if you just did that, you get disincentives for investment. Or people who say we want to boost entrepreneurship through lower rates. Well, yeah, but at the moment, and I've looked loads at this, I've spent a lot of years and years doing the research on this, most of the lower rates aren't going to people who are particularly entrepreneurial. They're not doing things that are bad, but why are we subsidising people to be, tradespeople or to be IT consultants? IT consultants are great. You need to subsidise them. You can just tax them like everybody else. So, but I think we get locked into this just thinking about the rates and not thinking about actually the allowances and the structure of the tax. Think about like an ISA. An ISA is a different way of doing this, but an ISA, you put money in, you get some income, you pay tax, you put money in your ISA, you don't get taxed on the way out. Well, that's one way of doing savings taxation. Another way is like a pension. So you put money in, you get tax relief up front, and then you pay tax on the way out. That's another way of not distorting savings. So there are always different ways of doing it, but that doesn't get into the debate. We just talk about rates up and down. So look, some people with capital gains are being taxed too much and some people are being taxed too little, in my mind, relative to how we tax labour income.
The problem is the capital gain applies to so many different types. They could almost be called different things, couldn't they? Like, as an example, I'm at a point in my life where I earn more from investment returns probably than I do from labour. I would like it if the labour that I put in the work was taxed at a lower rate than the capital gain. Obviously, I can protect most of it in tax-efficient accounts, but it does seem mad to me that this passive, just in the global stock market, it's gone up by $5,000, pay no tax on that. But, there was a point in my life where I would work for a couple of months to earn that £5,000. And I would have liked it if at the time I paid less tax on that income.
And that's the point, right? Whenever you talk about, you want higher capital gains tax rates, even with this tax basing I talked about, people say, it's really bad for entrepreneurs, it's really bad for this. And it's like, well, yeah, but we do tax some people at high rates on labour income that has an effect on labour income, right? That disincentivises work. So it's not like here, there is a choice about how you share the tax burden across different things. Again, if you want to incentivise entrepreneurs, you could find ways to do that, because the way we're doing our current system is not well targeted at targeting entrepreneurs. It's basically anyone who can use a legal form that's called a business gets these lower tax rates. So, but I think that's the point. We need to debate about the balance between labour and capital taxes. And again, then we could debate should the level be higher or lower overall, but it's about that. How do you compare the two of them?
What about sorry, we could talk round about my problems all day long. I don't want to sound kind of like, oh, my wallet's too heavy, woe is me. I think sometimes business owners can be labelled as, oh, you're all just tax dodging this and this.
Yep.
But I don't think people realise how high the tax burden gets once you cross over certain income thresholds and you use the corporation tax, or even if you've got international clients and they pay you, but they won't uplift for VAT, but you're being charged VAT on that income. It all goes.
There's loads of problems. I say the cliff edge is a particular problem because it's the sudden jump in the tax, and you just don't want to be. You have to earn a lot of money to be better off. At some point
you got to blow past it to hundreds of thousands of pounds for it to be in the distance. So if you,
but there's also problems. Talk about what I talked about earlier. If you're a business and you're starting out and it's a genuine business, actually you're trying to create something, then actually it's not always as generous up front as I think it should be. So actually I'd have more generous up front, more like you're putting £1,000 into, you're buying some piece of machinery or some piece of kit. I'd be more generous up front at that point around the investment. Or if you make a loss, I'd be more generous with losses than the current government is. Basically the government is asymmetric. They take a bigger share of the profits than they do of the losses, and that discourages risk taking because obviously it's an unequal share on each. I'd be more generous than that. But once you've been more generous with losses, and you've been more generous with upfront release for investment, then I think you can align the rates without these silly kinks. But again, I think the debate it's hard because that is quite a detailed set of propositions. And it's not that the politicians don't know about it, they've heard about this. It's about, I think, from their point of view, how do you communicate it to people and get people on board with that? And I think actually a lot of business owners would prefer the kind of system that I might set out. But if you do it as a change in the system, if you just shove a tax rate up, then that's obviously business owners aren't going to support that, right? But I think there are ways to change the structure more systematically.
I sometimes miss the days when everything just landed in my bank account and that's what I had.
Yeah.
Because it removed all of the decision, the admin, the accountancy fees, and they're like, oh, do you want to do this? Do you want to do that? It's a big head scratcher.
Yeah.
And that, at least back then it was like, there's my money.
Yeah. That's how I'm a sole trader and I've been loving it for my whole life. But we've got a financial plan on the podcast, friend of the podcast called Tom Ashworth. And I had a meeting with him and he's like, I'm spending too much on tax. I've got all these different incomes. And he's like, you need to set up a limited company.
You had a meeting with Tom?
Yeah.
Yeah,
decent. Was it good?
Great guy. Yeah, he's changed my whole financial life. Well, he's in the process of changing my but yeah, he's like, just you need to set up a limited company. This is the only way you can save money. I've got 4 different incomes. He's like, it just makes sense. And then he's taking me through all the steps. And I've always put it off because I'm like, it's so daunting. Opening a limited company, I don't know what to do. I don't know about what. I don't want to get in trouble with the government for HMRC tax. But he's like, it's not. I'll hold your hand. It's not that hard. So it is. I like being a sole trader. I'm a simple guy. Smart guy, but a simple guy. I like things just easy. I'm sole trader, money comes in, I pay my tax. And I'm I'm paying too much tax, so I've got no choice. I'd rather be a sole trader, but
it's more layers of the complexity.
Yeah, it's more layers of it. At least I've got someone to help me.
In an ideal world, the decision about whether how you structure yourself should be a purely commercial decision. It should be about what kind of structure do you want to operate through, and tax, in my mind, just shouldn't be a factor. I think you should. No, absolutely.
I agree. It shouldn't be.
Of course it is. Absolutely. And you should take advice. But the point is that to me is a broken system. Yeah. The fact that actually there's a big incentive to be basically there's a big tax penalty on employment. There's a big incentive to get out of employment. And then once you're in self-employment of some form, there's often an incentive to use a limited company. I think tax should have nothing to do with that. I think you should basically make that decision for commercial reasons, and then your tax bill, your ultimate tax should be the same, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
Regardless of how you've chosen to organise yourself. And it's not. It's obviously not. But people then spend a lot of time and a lot of energy trying to work these things out. And also big employers know that if they can contract with self-employed workers, they avoid the employer nicks. And therefore you have a lot of people who in a different world would actually just be employees, and they're not employees, and then we have all these rules about when is an employee, when they're not an employee, and this huge amount of burden on trying to work out that boundary in the system. And it's only a boundary because of the tax. If there was no tax change at the boundary, some people would be self-employed, some people would be employees. That'd be fine. It wouldn't matter.
Yeah.
But it matters hugely because you're whacking great tax boundary.
So another issue that you mentioned at the top that we face is an ageing population. And I think a focal point for that is the state pension system.
Yep.
Anytime I make any content on the state pension, basically anyone 40 and under goes, I'm not getting that. Do you think that's the case?
No, I think we'll keep a state pension. I think if only because at any point in time there are pensioners, and therefore any time you try to get rid of it, there'll be people who are just about to get their pension that would be really upset. So, and there's a good reason the government tries to support people in their older ages. So I think people like us can think we'll get some kind of state pension. And the question really is, when will we and should we start getting it? And what's the level of generosity? I mean, to bring back a fun fact for you that I'm always surprised by. So I've been talking my entire career about an ageing population is coming and we should get ready for it. But actually, it's only really about now, and I mean literally now, like this year, where the ratio of older people to working age people is really starting to go up. So for the last 20 years, it's been a conversation about it's going to happen and we should prepare. But now it is happening now. We have more older people relative to work, and that's going to keep going up. And that raises a whole bunch of challenges, not just for the state pension, but we have this kind of pay-as-you-go system where a lot of people think that they're putting money into their own pension through the government. Like, you pay your national insurance, you put it into your own pot. That's not how it's happening. You're putting money into the tax coffers and it's paying for the current old people. So our pensions will be paid not by, and I'm putting government here, not private pensions. So government pensions will be paid not by us, but by the next generation of younger workers. So that it's a challenge, not just for like the level of the pension, but who's going to pay it and how you're going to pay that thing. But you can also we could think about higher taxes for people while they're pensioners, for example. So the current system is very much you pay in working life and you pay, less when you're retired. We could change that balance. But look, I don't think we'll see, predictions are dangerous, aren't they? But I don't think we'll see no state pension. And if anything, recently the state pension has been really well protected. So it used to be the case that pensioners were actually among the poorest people in society. That's not true anymore. Of course, you can find poor pensioners, but actually, on average, pensioners are doing better than the working age population.
Is that the voting base? Is it just because it's the biggest voting base? And
that's got to be part of it, isn't it?
Yeah, I wonder. And is short-term protection of the state pension making it long-term unsustainable, i.e. the triple lock?
I think it's making it, the triple lock I think is a problem. And it's a problem because, so whatever you think the level of the state pension should be, and again, people could debate how much you think the state pension should be and whether it should, how it should rise over time. The triple lock has this really horrible feature, like a ratchet feature, because it's always one of three. It's always the inflation or earnings or 2.5%, and it means that whenever there's volatility in the economy and inflation happens to be higher, or you're always locking in the higher levels. So you're always ratcheting up the state pension, and that just ratchets up this ever increasing state pension. I think that is a problem. There are much better ways to do it. I like
your link to a percentage of earnings and then it stays flat, the 30% figure. I really like that paper.
Yeah. So I think, good. Yeah. I think basically it's something that says, look, we're going to pick a level, here's how it's going to rise, and you have some kind of inflation protection. So if in a period where there's high inflation, you want to protect people from that, and people in retirement can't easily adjust their income, so you might want to inflate. You can sort of do it, but do it for a temporary period. Don't ratchet it up forevermore. So I think we could. I think the triple lock is a problem. I think there are things we could do that wouldn't be just ignore pensioners, but have a more healthy, sustainable system. And it is a problem because you look down the track at the cost of older people, and actually healthcare is a big part of the cost. But pensions are a cost, and it's no good. I mean, people need to plan for the future. It's no good waiting until we're on the cusp of retirement and then changing the plan. That's a horrible way to do it. I think you need to be looking a long way forward and thinking about what's the state pension age, when is it going to rise, how is that rise going to be linked to longevity, is there going to be an automatic increase or is it going to be a choice, and when are we going to make that choices, and how's state pension going to rise? So people like us can plan, right? They can plan private pension provision, and they can plan working lives and when you might want to retire or different circumstances. So I think I'm optimistic in the sense that we have lots of choices here, but it has been so far that this triple lock is in place. Governments keep committing to it because they think they can't get rid of it. And that is going to make pensions really pretty expensive if we don't do anything about it.
It's the same thing, isn't it? It's the same theme of short-term politics rather than long-term thinking.
Yeah. But it's partly for people like us to then demand of our governments that we want them to look at ignore what's happening to pensioners today. We'll be pensioners at some point, hopefully. We should be thinking about today, when do you move the state pension age up? And that could be in the 2040s, 2050s, right? It could be a long way in the future. But we should be thinking now about when to make those decisions, or how to link future pensions that aren't about old people, right? Currently, it's about when we're going to be old people, we can vote for things now that will affect us when we're older.
How do people make those demands? Because there's lots of sensible people saying sensible things, and then the politics don't reflect it. We can say we should have those conversations, we should make those demands.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know. A question back to you in something. What do you think? We can have conversations like this and raise awareness. People, when they do meet their MPs or in polling groups, or they can vote they can vote for parties that do offer this. Obviously, it requires a party to actually start offering this. But
writing to MPs is probably a good shout. I think engagement with certain forms of content, because like the certain narratives build, and then I'm sure Labour are looking around going, what are we going to do? And it's the whole, they pick up the ideas that are lying around at the time, right? I
think sometimes engage with these debates, right? I think often the debate's really simplistic, and people think, pensioners like pensioners, don't want to hurt pensioners. And it's not about trying to hurt pensioners, right? It's about saying we have to manage how we change the state pension age over time, or change the triple log. Even just engaging with these debates and listening to these things, and avoid. I think anything that sounds sort of too good to be true or too simplistic probably is too good to be true or too simplistic. So I think partly just engaging with these bigger debates and being willing to think about, we should think now about what retirement looks like when we're older, because hopefully we will get to become old people and it'll matter. But there's no good waiting for 20 years to do that.
Now, what I would really like for the people of the UK is just certainty around these structures so that they can plan, because I feel that even though you sit there and go, oh no, I think there will be a state pension, the vibe is this thing is going bankrupt. I mean, I've seen papers that say, insolvent by X, Y, Z.
Yeah.
And then the actual pension structures on the private side, the SIPs, and it feels like they're constantly tinkering with that or threatening to.
Yep.
There's loads of uncertainty. So you're asking people to commit to a 30, 40-year savings plan when the rules change every year.
Yep.
And I would just like that to stop.
So there's currently, the government's doing a review of the state pension age, and they should, I think, make a clear plan for when it's going to change, which is not going to be anytime soon, but it could be in the a couple of decades' time. I think they should make some certainty around that. And actually, the pensions tax system is a good example as well. So because we're in this situation where everyone expects the Chancellor to put up taxes, we don't know which one she'll put up. She's ruled out a lot of things. There's always this nervousness about, are they going to change pensions taxation? People really respond to that. They start taking money out of their pensions. They start changing their behaviour. So that's a great example where we need a really clear, long run, like, here's what we think the tax system should look like, and it's going to stay like that for a long time. And don't keep and I think there are changes we could and should make to how we tax pensions, but I think what you don't want is constant speculation that it might change. You need a very clear, we're doing this, we've got a good system, or we're not going to change it, but at least have some predictability so people know that they're not going to be changed every 6 months.
Because I saw the review of the state pension age, and it's come round quick again, because they normally do them every few years or whatever, and they're doing another one. And to me, that just screamed, they're going to whack it up because they're like, oh God, it's not sustainable. But do you think that, like Torsten Bell and these kind of people, do you think they're credibly going to do something there that might actually be good and not just whack the age up?
I don't know, have to see, won't we? Look, I think you can see the pressures quite clearly, and I think you can see the case of, if you've got rising longevity, you have to. We have to choose. It's not them. It's we have to choose. At what point our retirement's going to start? How much time will people spend in retirement? So I think, and again, it's not about choosing in the next couple of years, right? That's nailed on. It's about choosing, when would it move to 69? When would it move to 70 possibly? I think the sooner you do it, the easier it is, actually, because the more you're making it about, the longer in the future it is, the easier it is to make the decision, because you've got to give people more time. The longer you wait, the harder it gets, because it feels like you're changing things. Another thing they could think about, and we've written lots about this, is whenever you move the state pension age, there are issues around the people who struggle to delay their retirement for whatever reason. They've got a low income, they've got a health problem. So you could do like mitigations around it. You could say, we're going to increase the state pension age to 69 or 70 at some point in time, but we'll have, some benefits, generous benefits for people who for whatever reason, for health reasons, can't make that delay. So there could be a package of things that make it a bit more palatable, for example. But you've got to think about them now.
And you've got to think of the carrot today. Like, what do you do for DC schemes today to say to people, you're going to not be able to get a state pension until you're 70, but what we're going to do is we're going to give you a better tax break or something? What's the...
Yeah. Well, sometimes pensions are actually, at the moment, really... They have pretty big tax breaks in pensions. So you don't, for most people, and it varies a bit for the self-employed, but you don't pay your tax up front. You pay tax on the way out. There's a big 25% tax-free bit that you can take. And actually, I would reform that. It's the salient bit of the system, but in some ways, it's actually more generous to people who are paying higher taxes, and actually not very valuable at all to somebody who's on a low income in retirement. I think you could readjust that. There's also, for most people, self-employed are a bit different, national insurance is never charged on that form of remuneration. You get no national insurance on the way in and no national insurance on the way out. That's an anomaly that I would start fixing. And again, if you thought about putting national insurance contributions on pensions in receipt, you might think about boosting the tax base for people in retirement. You think about all these things, but again, not to surprise people suddenly in a few years, but think about, okay, how could we transition to this system so people know what they're planning for and they know how to plan. Planning retirement's hard, right? It's hard to know how much you need and how much to save today for a house versus a retirement. It's hard enough without having to think about the tax system changing regularly. So I think stability is, I think we could have a better system, but I think stability is really important.
So to finish up, after all of this gloom and doom and a little bit of optimism, are you optimistic about the future of the UK?
I think, in general, I'm an optimist, I think. So look, it'll be easy to say no, because you look at the current political situation. We just talked about how we're not seeing tax reform. The debate's in a bad place. I don't think there's enough just movement in policy to make things better. So I could easily say no. I think it's all a bit rubbish. I think I am still optimistic for a few reasons. One is that I think we actually know a lot of the answers to a lot of things. Not to everything. There's more to learn. But I think we know how to make some policies better. We do have a pretty good evidence base. I think I know how to make a better tax system. I'm optimistic that actually people out there, people listening to this, want to be engaged in these debates. I think people have the capacity to engage in these debates. So I think I'm optimistic about people. I'm optimistic that we know quite a lot. We know how to make things better. And people could engage in these debates so that we make good choices. So that's a bit of a rubbish answer. It's kind of both about. So I look at the current situation. I'm not happy about it, but I can definitely see a world where it could be better. So I'm optimistic about that.
The only way is up.
Yeah.
Have a biscuit.
Great.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah,
Awesome. Thank you. So Damo, what do you think about that episode?
Well, I mean, she bought us biscuits, mate. So what do you think I thought?
Anyone that brings you food is in your good books.
That's it, mate. No, in all seriousness, Helen's taken on a massive job there and is filling some big shoes, and I think she's going to be amazing at it. She's a really natural communicator and feels like someone that genuinely cares and has good ideas and has obviously worked in that space for 20 years. So yeah, I enjoyed it, and I hopefully will speak to her again soon. Yeah. She focused on tax a lot because that's her background. I think we should link Dan Needle's episode here, who I mentioned. He is very focused on the types of tax changes that we could make to improve the system as well. And I think that feeds off that nicely. So check that one out.
Oh, and also I mentioned Tom Ashworth in the episode. So if you want to talk to him about your taxes, I'll leave his information in the link below.
You won't be doing any of that work.
I'll be doing none of that.
Someone somewhere will put the details there. Tremaine doesn't even reply to the comments, mate. You don't even know what a link is.
I started replying to the comments. Yeah. But yeah, I'll outsource it. Someone will put the link in the description.
Yeah. The videos will be here now because we've spoken for so long that you can only extend them for 10 seconds. So now here they are. Sorry about that. We'll keep talking. Now they're here. T is nowhere to be seen, though.